Hi, and welcome to this tutorial discussing academic research, giving you an introduction to concepts, terms that are used, what sort of things you need to look for when you're doing research at a college level, how to begin finding things that'll be useful for you. There's a lot of weird differences between using the library as opposed to any sort of research you might be used to doing on your own, and hopefully this will clear up some of those confusions and make it a little easier for you to get a start on college level research, the things your professors and instructors are looking for. Chief among the things that instructors are looking for is basically this idea of just going and digging and digging and digging until the assignment is completed. And that is a quote from a professor of physics at Duke University that he said way back in 1927. This was the reason his students didn't do well on assignments. Even back then and continuing on to the present day, this is what instructors think you're going to do. You're just going to dig and dig and dig until you get what they want out of the assignment and bring it forward. And this can be applied a bit to library research. I won't say you have to dig and dig and dig until you're completely exhausted, but there's no perfect resource most of the time to answer your research questions, and research is a process. It's not as straightforward as plugging in the puzzle pieces, which is a concept that a lot of students I talk to seem to have. They'll find that one source, plug it into their writing or their project, and be done. It's more of a cycle. So hopefully we can find a good middle ground between that professor's concept and maybe your concept of you'll find that puzzle piece and stick it in and be done. One thing that's good to know about going into researching in academic circles is how databases work. And this is true, this little diagram is true of web searches, and it's very true of library resources. You've got that red rectangle at the top is sort of the thing that's capturing all the information. Your orange triangles are sort of the intermediate step. In this case, they're labeled particular databases, but you could think of them as publishers or websites or people who are producing information. And then the cubes below, the yellow cubes, are the information holders, journal articles or books or sets of statistics. You can see that some of those boxes have arrows leading upward, and some of them connect all the way up to the top to the database or whatever that's doing your search, your collection. Some of them don't, and some of them connect in various ways. Hopefully this illustrates to you how hard it can be to find everything. There's nothing that will find everything. And there's a few different approaches that you need to take to do that digging, to do that really deep research that instructors are hoping that you'll do. At the very least, you're going to have to get beyond just finding one piece of information and plugging it in. It's a little more complex than that. This is also true of Google, of any web search as well. This is how they gather information. There's going to be things like that yellow box that's labeled Journal 5 that don't show up in particular resources. There's going to be things like journal number 3 or journal number 6 that show up in a few different places. But this is how the information is gathered and funneled upward. This is the thing that you use to find the information. Now, the information that you're finding, let's look at some examples here. If you did a search for global warming on the library's website, just in our basic search here, you'll find in the results that come up, and we'll talk more about this in another tutorial, you'll find books. Here's an example of a book that you'll find that you can read entirely online. You'll also find books that you have to check out. You'll find journal articles. This is what a journal article looks like. This is the scholarly journal articles that instructors often ask you to get in your research. This is considered the cream of the crop. They're written by researchers, for researchers. They're reviewed by researchers before they're published for their accuracy and for contributing to the body of knowledge. That's why they're sometimes called peer-reviewed or scholarly articles. You'll find just regular magazine articles or newspaper articles. You'll find newspapers come up like this on the website. And one key thing that makes it hard for a lot of students is these all look kind of the same. They're all a website with words on it. So you'll have to pay attention to some of the cues that we'll talk about in future tutorials to figure out, maybe from the title up here, this database, where these results are coming from, and determine their value. And we can also see this in just a web search for the phrase global warming. We've got lots of different things coming up here that hopefully these future tutorials will help you learn to pay attention to. Here's a Wikipedia article, here's news sources. You can tell that some of these things are coming from various groups, like the EPA is a government agency, .gov, NOAA is a government agency, Scientific American's a well-regarded journal. And then down here we've got some business publications, Wall Street Journal, Forbes magazine, Rolling Stone magazines coming up. So there's a lot to think about when you're doing research, no matter where you're finding the information or how you're getting to it. You have to think about whether you're capturing everything you're looking for, whether there's another place you could look for the information, and where this information came from in its original source. One thing that can help you is knowing about the abstract. For those who are asked to look for peer-reviewed or scientific journals, these are very daunting to a person who's new to college. They're daunting to somebody who's been away for a while. They're hard to read. They're hard to get through unless you're an expert in the field. Like I said, they're written for experts. And so the key thing to look for is called an abstract. And here's our journal article again. Journal articles will have either in their description about the article or at the first page something called an abstract. This paragraph describes the argument of the paper. It will save you time. You can read this paragraph and determine whether this 30-page journal article, 16-page journal article is worth your time to wade through. So keep in mind, if you're dealing with journals, check out the abstract. Another thing to think about is what's called following the citation trail. This is how professionals and scholars in a field do their research, and oftentimes they think this is how students do research too. What they do is they find 2 or 3 key articles and they'll look at the bibliographies. They'll find some articles in that bibliography, track those down and read them, and so on. The bibliography here it's usually listed at the end of a scholarly journal article. Will list out the other things that author drew from when he or she wrote this article. You can look these up, and oftentimes they'll be more on point than a web search might help you find, or a library search might help you find. So it foments the idea of connections, and that's how these instructors often do their research, and that's how they think we do research when we're not professionals in the field, is we make these connections and we follow them through. And it can be drawn out from this too that academic research isn't everything. There's definitely a lot of valuable and valued resources that you're not going to find in a scholarly peer-reviewed journal. And oftentimes you will discover these based on connections as well. If you're doing a paper on people who own auto repair shops, and you know a few people, and you want to find out what's important to them and in the running of their business, talk to those people. Don't try to find an article necessarily. So that was a quick and dirty overview to the academic research process and some of the key things about it, knowing the abstract and bibliography of a scholarly journal, knowing what a scholarly or peer-reviewed journal is, knowing that there's a difference, although you may not readily see it in this type of stuff you find online, that it might come from a book or it comes from a magazine, following the citation trail, things like that, and knowing, although we haven't discussed it, how to evaluate these things beyond what you see here. Next lesson we'll talk about the mechanics of doing searches on the library website, and then we'll dig into that evaluation piece.